Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Flowers for the Sea by Zin E. Rocklyn. This is a short fantasy body horror book that I took out of the library without knowing anything about it. Did not know the author, did not know the title or didn't recognize the title, but I decided to take it home and give it a read. And I'm glad I did because I feel like it was a very interesting and thought-provoking book, but I have many thoughts on it. So in this book review, I'm going to be giving a brief overview of the plot, as well as some of my specific and general thoughts on this book overall. And of course, I want to hear your thoughts on the book. If you have read it, please leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. I love to receive your thoughts and comments. So let's dive into Flowers for the Sea. The book is a little over 100 pages, so the author just gets right into the action. We are following a woman whose name is Iraxi, who has wound up on a boat. So the continent that she was living in flooded, and now everyone who was living there had to go live on boats in these oceans. This takes place in a fantastical setting, and Iraxi, we come to learn, actually came from a persecuted group on land. So it seems like in this land, when they were living on land, had an established government, hierarchy, and an established religious establishment. And Iraxi comes from a group of people who did not abide by that and had a more spiritual connection with the sea that they are now living on. So she faced a lot of horrible things in her early life, a lot of oppression or persecution from the people who were not interested or didn't like her and her group of people that she came from. However, they are all on this boat together. It seems like there was maybe some guilt involved with letting Iraxi come on board, but it's a good thing that the people who are now living on this ship, it's a good thing that they let her on board, because Iraxi now carries their secret, or the thing that they need to continue surviving as a species, because Iraxi is pregnant. The ship that they're living on, it's kind of implied there's nowhere else for them to go, so they're really trying to figure things out after this flood. The ship is trying to be self-contained. They have plants, they have a garden, but things are not going well. There have been several pregnancies aboard the ship, but both of them resulted in death, both of the child and the mother. So things have not been going well. But Iraxi, who was kind of led aboard out of guilt of how she had been treated, is now carrying a live baby and a seemingly healthy pregnancy that is going much better than anyone else could have carried a child up to this point. So Iraxi seems to be the key to the continuation, and people are very intrigued in following her, and they're also having to tolerate her because of her pregnancy and of her condition. So she gets things like additional rations for food, and this will continue, of course, after the child is born, because the baby will need to be fed. So this book is fantasy, but it's also body horror, because the book goes through a rather traumatic childbirth with fantastical elements that are quite horrible, and it leads to Iraxi kind of having to make decisions about where she wants her future to go and how much power she actually has now that the power has kind of flipped and she's in charge, not in charge, but she has a lot more power, having the only healthy pregnancy that has been brought to term at this point. The book is only like 104 pages, so I'm just going to leave it at that, so you have an opportunity to read and make your own conclusions. There were many aspects of this book that I did like. I'm not a big horror person, so the fact that there was a body horror element to this, even though like 90% of the body horror was just like a realistic depiction of childbirth and some of the bad things that happen in it, there were some fantastical elements that I think pushed it from just childbirth is kind of rough and we should be thankful for modern medicine to this is body horror. I don't think I would have, it wasn't so horrible that I had to quit, but it wasn't something that I would have picked up had I known that. And I think just be very careful going in, because at least 30 of the 100 pages are just about that, which was kind of horrible. I like the fact that everyone was contained on the ship and there was nowhere for anyone to go. So it wasn't like Iraxi could run off somewhere and have her own thing going. She really was trapped where she was. And I kind of like the element of everyone being stuck on board this ship. And I think that not really knowing what's going to happen with the pregnancy, especially, I mean, you kind of have a suspicion that the pregnancy is going to be a healthy, safe one, maybe, perhaps, but you also wonder why she is able to have a successful pregnancy when no one else has. It does kind of lend itself to some questions there, and I'm definitely it definitely keeps you hooked. It drags you in pretty quickly because there's not a lot of complicated things to learn, and you start to learn where Araxi stands with all these individuals in the ship, and you start to see ways that she's subtly trying to take back power, being in this very bad situation, and maybe having the tiniest sliver of power for the first time in her life, having this unique situation that no other woman on the ship seems to be able to replicate. So overall, it hooks me in. It's just over 100 pages, so I read it in one sitting. It was enjoyable. There was a body horror aspect, which I don't normally like, but it wasn't so horrible that I felt like I had to put the book down, but I do feel like I should warn you about it. I like the fantastical element of being on these seas and this flooded land and not really sure where to go. It feels like a more horrific version of the book that I read earlier this year called Letter to the Luminous Deep. The world does. Nothing else about those two books are similar, but Letter to the Luminous Deep is maybe a world where everything flooded, but life is continuing on and people have adapted, and this is where the world has flooded and the survivors are stuck on this ship and nothing seems to be going well. So that's the only comparison I can draw between those two. Now some general thoughts. And this all comes from my own personal opinion, and I want to start by saying I'm not one of those people who actually believes that every protagonist in a book needs to be a good protagonist. I think you can have a compelling protagonist, which is not necessarily a good person or who always makes good decisions, without like a moralizing narrator coming in and explaining to the reader that this character is making a bad decision, or when there's like some third party who's coming in and explaining why the main character made a bad decision. I actually find that very offensive as a reader when I feel like the author needs to baby me through a book where I hear that the main character is not making a good decision. So this is not me saying that the main character, due to some decisions or some things, how do I say this? You can have a main character who makes bad decisions, and I don't think that that means that you as the author are endorsing the bad decisions or that it's a bad writing. But now that I've got that out of the way, I think anger is an emotion that has a very short shelf life on usefulness, and this is in general and in real life. Anger is really good as an emotion when you need to make change. You're sick of your situation and you need to make change. You don't like the way you're being treated, so you're going to make change. You don't like something has to change in your environment, or you need to motivate yourself to do something. It's a very useful emotion in that sense, but anger is one of those emotions that if you hold on to for too long, it starts to become very, very heavy. And this book had a very pervasive presence of anger throughout it. And I don't think that means that the anger isn't justified. Araxi has clearly suffered horribly at the hands of these individuals, and it makes sense that she is very, very angry. And that's where I say, like, it just because you shouldn't be angry, or holding on to anger for a long time isn't necessarily conducive. Part of the horror of the situation is Araxi is stuck on a boat with people who treated her very, very horribly, and she has nowhere else that she can go. But the entire book had a very heavy feel to it because there's just this blinding anger throughout this book that it is kind of shows that when you hold on in general, not just characters in a book, when you hold on to anger for too long, it stops being useful, and it just kind of becomes this heavy, pervasive presence, which is very, very hard to get through. And if you have met someone who is permanently angry, who is just perpetually in a state of anger at everything and everyone around them, even when that anger is justified, it's a very heavy presence. And I feel like I'm getting into like this quasi-spiritual realm, but if you know the feeling, it's just it's a heavy damper on everything around. And I don't have any solutions because I'm not a therapist. And Araxi from this book is clearly in a very difficult situation in which you can't just like think positive or change your situation because there's nothing she can do. But the anger is really, really heavy, and it was really wearing me down. By the time I was on page 70 or 80, just the anger and the rage that was boiling within Araxi, I think the author may have been trying to spin it as like she wants to take back power from this bad situation, but it just started to feel like a heavy, pervasive presence. And if this book was like 300 pages, I definitely would have DNF'd it, because just reading about so much anger over and over is just, I don't know, that's not how I'm going to spend my time, even though I feel like that anger for this main character was justified. And there really isn't anything she could do. This is a horrific situation she's stuck in. But I only finished it because I was so close to the end. And yeah, it's kind of a hard book to get through due to that anger. I almost feel like, and this might be controversial, I read Harlan Ellison, A Boy and His Dog, in which the main character is not a good person. I wouldn't even say he's a morally gray person. He's just a bad person, the main character. He's grown up in a very difficult situation and he's having to make difficult decisions, but some of his decisions are not maybe morally correct. If you've read the book, and I know it's a very popular, famous book, then you would know. That book was hard to get through because the main character kept making bad decisions, and Harlan Ellison himself was a character, but somehow it was easier to get through than the pervasive anger in this book. Just like the seething anger. And you know what, though? I do have to give credit to the author, Zin Rocklyn, because if she was trying to get through the seething anger that was just consuming the main character, which I suspect was something she was trying to get across, and that's where it goes in that I don't need every character to be a happy person, then Zin Rocklyn did a really good job, because the anger was all consuming. It was a suffocating presence. It was like another character on screen throughout this book. And so I think overall the book, I feel like I have complex feelings, and I tried to sit on this book for as long as possible for filming this review, because I feel like that anger as another character was really well done, but it was still really hard to read. It didn't make it any easier to read. And I'm very curious if anyone else read this book, if they also felt the same way about the anger that I did, that I'm trying to convey in this section. Please let me know, because I felt like the anger was just so pervasive and acting as another character on screen as it just blossomed throughout the book, and it never went away. So I do not understand Roxy's position. I'm not in a boat, but I understand how Roxy could feel so angry all the time. There really is no alternative. It's a horrific situation, and she's trying to claw back a modicum of power. But for me, it was just a very, very heavy book to read because of the amount of anger in it, and because of the absolute rage that pervaded throughout it. Was just, yeah, very heavy. And I think expanded to 300 pages would have been too much. So I think the length made it a very, very good, the length decision was a very, very good call on the author's part. Overall, though, I do think this is very thought-provoking. I think it would be fantastic to read with another person. I would love to hear other people's thoughts on it. So if you've read this book or have any thoughts, maybe you think I'm totally off base with the anger, maybe you love the main character, maybe you hate the main character, please put all your thoughts in the comment section down below. This is one of those books that I feel like makes more sense once you start getting alternative perspectives, or other people who have read it begin talking to you about it. So I would love to hear other people's thoughts if they have read this book, on how they felt about it. Again, would love to receive it. I like receiving all of your comments, so please put those in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.